Now, of course, much of the attention has been focused on Mr. Carney's goal of developing these projects of national significance, the first tranche of which were announced just 2 weeks ago. And to talk about this, we're now joined by Stephen Thomas. He is the Clean Energy Manager with the David Suzuki Foundation. Stephen, thank you for coming to the studio.
Thanks so much for having me.
Listen, I want to acknowledge, first and foremost, you're actually in town with partner groups trying to push forward a national electricity grid, which we're going to talk about in a second. But I first wanted to get your reaction to the Prime Minister, mentioning sustainability at the United Nations this week, the first time he's really talked about the environment since being elected, because despite his environmental credentials, what we have heard from Mr. Carney in recent weeks has been essentially the cancellation of the carbon rebate program and the suspension of the 2026 EV mandate. So I wonder, are you at all comforted to hear him mention sustainability again?
So we know that the Prime Minister understands the issue of climate change, understands that Canada is seeing the impacts of climate change more than ever. But we want to see the Prime Minister take that understanding into action. As you mentioned, most of the actions that we've seen from this Prime Minister so far have been backtracks when it comes to our action on climate change. You mentioned a couple, but we're also now not on track to meet our 2030 climate commitments. What I also heard the Prime Minister say at the UN table today is that we should be using public resources that are scarce in the best way possible. And we think that's exactly what we're here to push for with the Prime Minister when it comes to the east-west electricity grid based on renewables.
Okay, let's talk a bit about that, because you are pushing this electricity grid as a project of national significance that was not included in the first tranche. It was not mentioned as possible second-tier projects for the government to pursue. What exactly are you calling on the government to invest in?
So we're really excited to be on Parliament Hill today talking with more than 36 MPs about this issue of building an east-west electricity grid that's based on renewables, that is based on Indigenous-led projects, and that respects the rights of workers. The coalition's pretty wide-ranging, and we're doing this work together for the first time. We're coming from labor unions to municipally elected officials like councillors and mayors.
Making the argument that
this east-west electricity grid is worthwhile here in Canada, as we're looking for big ideas that solve the problems that we're facing as a country. We think they should look no further than building out this east-west grid based on renewables, because it's going to save people money on their power bills. It's going to create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs here in Canada, all while we do what we can toward climate action and having better air for ourselves and for our children when it comes to our health.
Mm-hmm. Do a compare and contrast for me, because when you look at the first tranche of projects, there are environmental arguments made around them. For example, LNG, copper mine, small nuclear reactors, all cleaner forms of energy or leading to cleaner forms of energy. Compare that to what you're suggesting here as a national project.
So it's disappointing to see fossil fuel projects like LNG be considered in this first tranche. And what we think we need to move toward instead are industries that are here to stay. The rest of the world is moving away from oil and gas, so building export like oil pipelines or like natural gas facilities to export LNG, we think is a step in the wrong direction. These are industries and these are sectors that are not here for the long term, not if we have a planet for our children and grandchildren to inherit. So what we really want is to show up for communities, show up for workers for the long term. So when we talk about building out the electricity grid, no matter what crystal ball you're looking in here in Canada, we're going to be using a lot more electricity in the near term, and the rest of our economy is going to electrify as we move away from those fossil fuels. So the jobs we're creating to build out this grid are here to stay.
Now, part of the calculus, though, in expediting these deals, prioritizing these projects, is this idea that it's not just the projects themselves, but the very fact that behind them are the backing of provinces and territories, other partners. So they're stepping forward. It allows for a national deal to be reached at a far faster rate, which Canada's economy needs right now. Does your project have the national backing that the others do?
We think it does. We don't have a proponent for an exact electricity line between, two example provinces right now, but we think that is because the federal government hasn't yet declared this as a priority. In the past, the federal government has tried to have projects like this work. You might remember the Atlantic Loop from a few years ago. But when we try to do this as a country, it tends to fall apart when we talk about who pays for it. So certainly utilities, provinces, and the First Nations, who we think should own much of this infrastructure, all have resources to contribute here. But the federal government also has to put in federal dollars as well as that convening power to make sure
does
that
that slow down then? Because part of this is a quick investment in order to create economic growth to basically counter Donald Trump's tariff war.
Exactly.
So is there the speed behind this project if you don't yet have a national proponent?
We think there is, because this can be sequenced. Unlike a pipeline where you have to build the whole thing from east to west, when we talk about the east-west electricity grid, it can happen in place, in piecemeal. If two provinces are ready to go with their version of this electricity grid, they can start building it next year. The other thing that's part of this vision of an east-west grid are the renewable projects that power it. So those are certainly shovel-ready. Those can be spun up from an idea to an operating project in as little as 2 or 3 years. So when we're looking for shovel-ready projects, it's this idea of the electricity grid, it's the idea of renewables that we think we should be reaching for. The other thing I'll mention here when we're talking about the threats from the United States, especially with sectors like steel and aluminum, that's exactly what this grid is built of. When we talk about the transmission towers and the transmission lines, they're built of aluminum and steel. So we need Canadian content, and we need to make sure that we're showing up for workers to build out this grid.
Quickly running out of time, but again, we heard the Prime Minister mention sustainability this week more audibly than he has in the past few weeks. Do you think that you will find a champion within the government on this now that the Prime Minister rather has brought up sustainability as an issue again?
I hope so. I hope that the Prime Minister turns these words into action when it comes to acting on climate change, because again, we've seen too many steps backward. That's what we're here this week to do with about 30 of our colleagues across these 17 organizations. So we do hope that they listen, and we're certainly here with an open door as we talk about how best to build out the East-West grid in Canada.
Stephen Thomas, thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you so much.